The courtroom was heavy with silence, the kind that presses down on your chest and makes breathing feel like a task. Every seat was filled, and all eyes were fixed on the man at the center of it all. Sergeant Nathan Carter sat in his wheelchair, dressed in his military uniform, the metal on his chest glinting under the fluorescent lights. His hand gripped the leash of the dog by his side, Thor, a German shepherd with a calm yet watchful demeanor. To everyone else, Thor looked like any other military working dog, but to Nathan, he was so much more. He was family. Nathan's jaw tightened as the judge addressed him, reminding him that this might be his final chance to speak. The Army had decided Thor was to be reassigned, considered government property, needed for another mission. After years of risking their lives together, the thought of losing Thor now felt like a cruel betrayal. Nathan's hands trembled as he adjusted his grip on the leash, his voice barely steady enough to speak. "Your Honor," he began, his tone raw with emotion. "Thor isn't just a military asset. He saved my life in ways no one here could ever understand. In the field, he pulled me from danger, shielded me from gunfire, even warned me of traps before I could see them. And when I came home, when I couldn't even face myself in the mirror, Thor was there. He gave me a reason to keep going. Please, don't take him from me." The judge's face remained neutral, his eyes studying Nathan for a long moment before he leaned forward, preparing to deliver his ruling. But before the words could leave his mouth, something unexpected happened. Thor stood abruptly, yanking the leash free from Nathan's trembling hands. The dog moved toward the judge, barking sharply, his voice echoing through the courtroom. The crowd gasped, and the bailiff stepped forward instinctively, though Thor showed no signs of aggression. His barks were insistent, purposeful, as if he were trying to communicate something urgent. "Thor!" Nathan called, his voice breaking with panic. But deep down he knew. He had seen this behavior before, countless times on the battlefield. Thor wasn't just barking, he was alerting. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. "What's wrong with the dog?" Someone whispered from the back row. Nathan's chest tightened as he wheeled himself forward, his voice trembling. "He's not just barking, he only does this when there's danger. He's trying to warn us about something." The judge froze, his gavel forgotten in his hand, his eyes locked on Thor. The room fell silent again, except for the dog's barks, echoing like a heartbeat. Whatever Thorson said, it wasn't just about Nathan. The dog knew something new Nielsen did. And for the first time that day, Nathan felt a flicker of hope. This wasn't just a goodbye. Something bigger was about to unfold, and Thor was determined to make them all see it. The room was silent, except for Thor's relentless barking. Each sharp sound echoed in the vast courtroom, bouncing off the dark wooden walls and cutting through the tension like a blade. Thor's stance was slow, his body tense, ears spinned back, and eyes locked on the judge's bench. Nathan's grip tightened on the armrests of his wheelchair as she watched the dog. This wasn't random barking. Thor's body language was unmistakable. He had detected something. Nathan's heart pounded, a rush of adrenaline, reminding him of moments on the battlefield, but this wasn't war. This was supposed to be a courtroom, a place of order. "Thor, heel," Nathan called, his voice firm but trembling. Thor briefly glanced back at him, his gaze sharp, as if to assure his handler that there was in control. Then, without hesitation, Thor returned his focus, pacing in short, deliberate steps in front of the judge's bench. His barks shifted to deep, guttural growls that sent a shiver throughout the room. The audience began murmuring nervously, the earlier sympathy for Nathan now morphin' into palpable unease. "Mr. Carter," the judge said, his tone elate with irritation. "Control your dog or I will have to." "Your Honor," Nathan interrupted, his voice louder, steadier, though his tightened with fear. "Thor isn't misbehaving. He strained to detect threats, bombs, explosives, danger. He wouldn't act like this unless he felt something was wrong. The room fell silent again as Nathan's sword settled in. Heist's explanation shifted the atmosphere, replacing skepticism with a creeping sense of dread. Before anyone could respond, Thor suddenly stopped barking. The abrupt silence was jarring, almost deafening. Thor's body went completely rigid as his head snapped, ped toward the farand of the courtroom. His ears perked sharply, and a loud, menacing growl rumbled from his chest. The shift was so sudden, so intense, that even the judge froze. Ali turned toward the heavy wooden door leading into the courtroom. A collective uneasy settled over the room, and the murmurs turned to panicked whispers. Nathan's breathing quickened as he followed Thor's line of sight. His pulse thundered in his ears. He had seen this exact behavior before, on the battlefield moments before. Thorunko verita buried explosive or signala dananem yambush. Whatever. Thorson said now wasn't a good Thor, Nathan whispered, his voice breaking with tension. What is it? But Thor didn't move. His entire body remained locked in place, his growl growing deeper, vibrating through there like a warning. Whatever danger he had detected, it was no longer just a threat to Nathan. It was something that could put everyone in that room at risk. The low growl from Thor reverberated through the courtroom like distant thunder, freezing everyone in place. Ale as were fixed on the dog, his body tense, his gaze locked on the heavy wooden door sat, he farand off the room, even the judge, who moments ago had been prepared to reprima, and Nathan now seemed unnerved. His gavel remained forgotten in his handash. He exchanged uneasy glances with the bailiff as the air felt electric. Thick with a tension that not only could explain, Nathan's breath came faster, his hands gripping the armrests of his wheelchair as if bracing himself for a blast. He had seen this before, too many times to count on the battlefield. Thor's instincts had been the difference between life and death. His warning had always meant nothing. Danger was close, very close. Stay calm, Nathan murmured to himself, but the words felt hollow, even to him. The bailiffs, unsure of how to proceed, hesitated by the judge's bench. One of them, a man with a broad frame and a wary expression, finally stepped forward, his hand resting on the weapon at the ship. It's just a dog, right? He muttered, though his voice betrayed his own unease, probably reacting to the noise or the crowd. But even as he spoke, his steps were cautious, his movements deliberate. Nathan shook his head, his voice rising just enough to cut through the murmur of the crowd. No, Thor doesn't react to noise or people like this. He's trained to sense danger, things we can't see. Trust me, if he's growling like that, there's a reason. His words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one moved. The judge, visibly unsettled, finally nodded at the bailiffs, motioning for them to investigate the door. Thor's growling grew louder as the bailiffs approached the door. The large man reached out hesitantly, his hand gripping the metal handle. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Nathan's heart pounded as he watched. Every muscle in his body coiled with anticipation. Thor's body remained rigid, his growls turning into a series of sharp, clipped barks as the handle began to turn. The door creaked open, revealing the dark hallway beyond. At first it seemed empty, but Thor's sparking only intensified, his eyes fixed on something unseen. The larger bailiff took us to Pinto the hallway, his hand still on his weapon. He glanced back at the courtroom, his face pale, and then turned forward again. A second later, his voice broke the silence. There's something here. Nathan's pulse quickened as he leaned forward in his chair, his chest tight with dread. Whatever something the bailiff had seen, it was enough to make Thor's instincts flare to life. And Nathan knew better than anyone. Thor was never wrong. The air in the courtroom seemed to grow heavier, as if the tension itself was pulling the oxygen from the room. Thor sparking echoed sharply, each sound reverberating off the wooden wall ls. His body remained locked in a stance of pure alertness, muscle stout, head low, and his gaze fixed like a lacerante darkal way beyond the open door. The larger bailiff, now visibly unici, took another hesitant step forward, his boots clicking softly against the tiled floor. His hand hovered near his weapon, his body stiff with caution, as though expecting something to lunge out of the shadows. "What's going on out there?" the judge demanded, his voice cracking slightly, despite his attempt to maintain authority. He gripped the gavel tightly, his knuckles as darted nervous lie between the doorway and Thor. The dog's growls deepened, a low, menacing rumble that vibrated through the courtroom and sent shivers down the spines of everyone present. The larger bailiff glanced back toward the room, his face pale and tight with uncertainty. "I don't see anything," he said hesitantly, his words measured, but something doesn't feel right. His gaze shifted back to the hallway, his brow furrowed as if trying to shake off his sound doubts. What the hell was that? Nathan's heart pounded in his chest. He gripped the leash tightly, his knuckles white, his pulse racing in his ears. He could feel it now, too. Something was wrong. Something was coming. The larger bailiff stepped fully into the hallway, his gun drawn and his eyes scanning the dimly lit corridor. His partner followed cautiously, flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. The beam cut through the darkness, but the hallway appeared empty, silent, and still. Yet Thor's barking didn't waver, his growls growing deeper, more insistent. Nathan's instincts screamed at him to act, to shout for an evacuation, but he could already see the fear paralyzing the room. None of them were moving. "Do you see anything?" the judge called out, his voice cracking as he leaned forward in his seat. The gavel trembled slightly in his hand, and his usual air of authority was replaced with an unmistakable edge of fear. The larger bailiff glanced over his shoulder, his face pale and glistening with sweat. "Nothing yet," he said, his voice low but tight, as if he were a fear that speaking too loudly would provoke whatever might be lurking. "But it doesn't feel right." He took another step forward, the weight of his boots echoing down the hall. The spectators in the courtroom whispered nervously, some clutching their belongings, others inching toward the exits. The uneasy energy in the room was spreading like wildfire.